Let's face it, homosexuality happens. In fact, in the animal kingdom, gay and lesbian sex is pretty much as common as straight sex. Boys on boys, girls on girls, boys on girls, boys on boys on boys on girls. You get the picture. So the next time someone tells you that the natural union is between one male and one female, you might want to remind them that the only added benefit of a male-female partnership is the possibility to produce offspring.
Such a smugness to stupidity. It's really just such an offense to more than just biology. So for us, sexuality can't be taken lightly. And by the way, that person is in charge of the education of thousands of children. Welcome to the Father Leo Show, where I am dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. And in this episode, we are going to talk about the future of sexual education for children. But please know that this is a conversation specifically for adults, and particularly for parents of children, especially you're trying to teach them a Catholic perspective on sexual education. But before we jump into that, please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. It really does help us in promoting our show to the masses. Also, I will be offering my commentary exclusively for those who are part of our Patreon community. Remember that there are several levels of the Patreon community, and so you can join even for free, but we also certainly appreciate when you support us with a small monthly gift, which helps our staff continue to produce what I would call good, informative materials. Things that aren't gonna, like information that's not gonna like try to divide us or to make us angry, but really to give us a pastoral approach to these hot topics that are just coming at us and we don't know how to dissect it or how to discern it. And so that's what the Patreon support does. So let's just jump right into it with our understanding of the Catholic faith's approach to sexual education. Let's admit, when people think of the Catholic Church and sexual education, they automatically think it's a bunch of don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. And people assume that Catholicism has a very negative outlook on sexuality. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. The biggest difference between a Catholic approach to sexuality and, say, a worldly view is that we see it through a theological lens, that it actually has a divine purpose. Also, the Catholic Church approaches sexual education much differently from a Protestant point of view. Whereas Protestants see it through a lens of puritanicalism, the Catholic understanding is that we see it through a lens of natural law. We're not afraid of sexuality. We don't approach it the way Protestants would approach it because we're not prudes in a way. We understand that it is a part of life. Nudity is not anything we should be ashamed of. I mean, my goodness, if you go to the Sistine Chapel, you'll look up. This is where they actually elect the popes. We have statues who are nude and images that have nudity all over the place. But that doesn't make it a sin. It makes it theological. And so we're not going to approach sexual education only through the lens of biology or sociology, but through theology. And so to help us understand that, I want to kind of read out the Vatican guidelines. This is a summary from CERC, which is Catholic Education Resource Center. And when it comes to the question of the Catholic Church's teaching about sexual education, this is especially formulated by Popes Pius XI and Pius XII, is that it should not be primarily a matter of giving explicit information at all, but rather it should be a matter of inculcating modesty, purity, chastity, and morality, a matter of teaching the 6th and the 9th commandments that talk about lust as a deadly sin, as well as abusing people and treating them as objects. So a coveting of a neighbor's spouse, for example. And so the Vatican II's declaration on sexual education talks about a more positive and prudent sexual education when it gets around to discussing where education should be performed, it speaks of the Catholic schools as performing its services as partners of the parents. So basically, Vatican II is saying, yes, we need to have Catholic education on sexuality in schools, but it's simply acting as a partner to parents. Parents are the primary educators on all matters, from education on a general level, spiritual level, but specifically on sexual matters. And so this comes out particularly in the Vatican II Constitution on the modern church in the modern world, called Gaudium et Spes, which is joy and hope. This is a Vatican II document that takes up that same theme, and they really want to focus on cultivating of chastity. So sexual education must be taught. It has to be partnered with the parents, and it has to be within the positive context of responsibility, within the framework of gift, as well as cultivating chastity. The problem is that we are living in a modern world, and people want to think of sexual education, but the question that needs to be asked is, what kind of sexual education are we talking about? We're going to get into this in terms of the social understanding. But for Catholics, the Catholic understanding should always be within the context of a positive moral theology. We can't look negatively on sexuality. We shouldn't be ashamed of it. We shouldn't be embarrassed of it. We shouldn't pretend that it doesn't exist, that there are going to be divergent approaches to sexual education and sexual exploration and experimentation. We know that the LGBTQ community is out there. We know that there are just as many sins committed by heterosexuals as homosexuals. And so we can't be kind of nervous about this. The Catholic Church wants us to have confide, with faith, a confidence with it. And so they're saying, rather, what they really aim at, this is what the world is teaching, is a breaking down of traditional morality and sexual inhibitions in favor of actually encouraging sexual experience. This is what the world wants to do. They want children to have an understanding of safer sex through the use of modern prophylactics and contraceptive devices. But the aim of the modern cultural approach is to train kids to get with today's sexual revolution. And that's problematic. So we have to remember that the Catholic schools often take kind of a traditional stricture against imparting explicit sexual information, which I think is appropriate, but it has to also be age appropriate, simply because there's so much complexity. Now, this again means that sexual education from a Catholic perspective tends to have either an added moral value to it, or, depending on the kind of school it is, if it's a more liberal school, they approach it the way of the world. So I think when we talk about Catholic sexual education, number one, we should never be afraid to talk about it, but always within age-appropriate measures. Number two, that schools do have a responsibility, but only as an aid to the parents, which means that the parents have to be very confident in how they approach it. Catholics approach things differently from the way the world approaches it versus the way even other Protestants approach it. Catholic theology always sees sexuality as a gift, i.e. something positive, and therefore a responsibility, which is honestly the exact opposite of the way the culture in the modern world approaches it. And we're going to see examples of that right now when we talk about our culture. Let's admit our culture is pretty messed up when it comes to sexuality. They want to be inclusive of every approach to sexuality, but they don't want to do it through an actual lens of how it affects the psychology. They just want to talk about it from a biological point of view, manifested by a screwed up sociology. But again, if you take theology out of any other ologies, whether it be psychology, sociology, biology, then you're going to have less than logic. You're going to have less than a logos, a logical conclusion. It won't truly, sexuality is no longer positive sociologically. People are literally getting into fights about it all. You remember the Me Too movement? Well, I'm glad that that happened, but then they shot themselves in the foot and just started accusing everyone of sexual harassment. But then you have the LGBTQAI plus community that says, if you actually try to challenge my sexual preference, well, that's harassment too. You can see that if you take God out of the equation, you get nothing but chaos, and this is a perfect example of it. This is literally a group of people who want to fight against a bill that will punish people who abuse children. This is insanity, but this is what's happening in our world right now.
We believe that SB 1414 takes an overly punitive approach that fails to address the root causes of these issues and will not effectively stop sexual violence. We are particularly concerned that the harsher penalties proposed in this bill will disproportionately impact marginalized communities, especially members of the LGBTQ community, who already suffer from systematic biases within the criminal justice system, particularly when it comes to sexually based offenses. Studies have shown that LGBTQ people, particularly gay and transgendered individuals, are more likely to be charged with sex offenses compared to their heterosexual counterparts. For instance, LGBTQ individuals are 9 times more likely to be charged with sodomy. Measures like SB 1414 lead to higher rates of incarceration, longer sentences, and increased difficulties in finding housing and employment.
Today, EBC must strongly oppose Senate Bill 1414 for the reasons I will state. We stand against any punitive measure that perpetuates systemic injustices, and we emphasize instead the need for community-based solutions. We strongly support investments in victim services and programs to provide housing and other alternatives to help people escape trafficking. We are concerned that the harsher penalties contained in this bill will disproportionately impact marginalized communities, particularly Black and Brown individuals who already bear the brunt of systemic biases within our criminal justice system.
Honestly, whenever I see people wearing a mask, I automatically have a bias, and I'm sorry. But whenever I hear a person with a mask use the word systemic anything, then I know it's a word salad nothing burger. These are people who use a lot of words because they can pronounce it properly, but they're really saying nothing. But when you actually listen to what they're saying, in their nothingness, they are encouraging that there should be no laws to protect children from people who want to abuse them. This is insanity. And this is what the world is teaching about sexuality, that you can do it with whoever you want, wherever you want, for whatever reason, as long as you kind of both agree. Remember, this was a bill to protect children by making it criminal to abuse a child. And that you have these very woke liberal women talking about systemic this, that, and the other, which is really just systematically trying to dismantle the systems to protect children. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people, if you get this clip, you're going to be coming at me with a lot of hate speech and a lot of shade saying, but your church abuses boys. Well, guess what? Our church did not do a great job in protecting these children because the culture was so messed up at the time. This was all at the height of the sexual revolution. This is the product of the sexual revolution. Thankfully, the church has actually done something to clean it up, where they actually have a lot of processes in place a lot of psychological testing, more than even some government employees, to make sure that there is less likelihood that children would be abused. There are so many precautions, so many required lessons and evaluations to protect children, and we never stood in the way of criminal prosecution. Can you imagine if I was with this bunch of woke women? I mean, I don't have any trouble hanging out with them and praying for them, but could you imagine if I was up there testifying, yes, we should not criminally prosecute sexual abusers of children? Could you imagine? Why do these women get a chance to say this nonsense? This is pure, stupid evil. To the point where now they're having gay camps like this.
I work at Camp Brave Trails. Of course I'm in full Frankenfurter drag since 7 a.m.
I work at Camp Brave Trails. Of course I have ducks in my pockets.
I work at Camp Brave Trails. Of course I feel safe to embrace my autism.
I work at Camp Brave Trails. Of course I'm decked out in rainbow all the time.
We do the photos and videos at Brave Trails.
Of course I'm filming this in selfie mode.
I work at Camp Brave Trails. Of course I keep Band-Aids in my fanny pack at all times.
I work at Camp Brave Trails.
Of course I know how to facilitate a group circle.
I'm really sorry.
I work at Camp Brave Trails. Of course I make 5,500 miles just to come to camp.
I work at Camp Brave Trails. Of course I can be my most authentic self here.
Okay, Camp Brave Trails. Avoid this at all costs. Sounds very noble, bravery. But then you have these group of young people, and you know, in some circles, they would have just been called nerds back during my high school days. Now, I don't know, that might be criminally offensive if you were to call them that. But they certainly are not part of, say, a mainstream approach to growing up based on their outfits, based on their attitudes. What was funny is that they were using a circus-themed background song because this looked like a circus. A circus that would lead us to more confusion than anything else. I mean, this was kind of clowny, and clowns always freak me out, but this would have freaked me out a little bit as well. And so this, what I would call this approach to trying to attract young people to embrace their sexuality at a young age. Like, what age is this camp? I'm afraid to actually look this stuff up online. Who knows what'll happen? But I can tell you this, that there was an 11-year-old boy who actually got a book. And let me tell you about this information because it's devastating.
Laughing when I can't undo his shirt buttons. He's undoing my belt. I'm reaching into his bedside drawer for a condom. You can see where this is going. But this reminds me so much of the first time we had sex. We were both terrified. Now, this book was at my middle school, and it was on a stand. When I rented it out to show my dad it, the librarian asked if I wanted more and if I wanted a graphic novel version.
That was an 11-year-old from Maine, speaking at his local school board meeting. As a mom, I can't with this. So the book he's reportedly reading from is called Nick and Charlie, about two early teen boys who steal wine and then sexually experiment with each other. And he checked it out of his school's library. So teacher unions and school districts have deemed classic literature racist, but sexually explicit books for children are okay.
We're seeing this more and more and more. And this is what is frightening, is that there are people in the world who are in charge of your child's sexual education curriculum, including this maniac.
Let's face it, homosexuality happens. In fact, in the animal kingdom, gay and lesbian sex is pretty much as common as straight sex. Boys on boys, girls on girls, boys on girls, boys on boys on boys on girls. You get the picture. So the next time someone tells you that the natural union is between one male and one female, you might want to remind them that the only added benefit of a male-female partnership is the possibility to produce offspring.
Such a smugness to stupidity. It's really just such an offense to more than just biology. It's an offense to history. It's an offense to her own parents. I mean, is that the only thing that sexuality is good for, is the possibility, heterosexual sexuality is good for is the possibility of procreation? Well, we know that it is because we see life as a gift and therefore responsibility. The other aspect of sexual education is that sexuality is also conjugal. It joins people together in an unbroken, committed bond. So for us, sexuality can't be taken lightly, as this very strange person is encouraging children to believe. And by the way, that person is in charge of the education of thousands of children and produces content like this on social media. You know, Libs of TikTok has always been a great platform, I'm going to talk about it. Maybe our graphics team will post a picture of it and hopefully blurt it all out. But I'm just going to tell you that this book is actually trying to teach children how to engage in a self-serving, selfish sexual act, i.e. masturbation. This is the kind of nonsense that they call sexual education. And I guess one of the most frustrating things is coming from the High Wire episode, Grammar to Grooming. This is disturbing. Check this out.
There's just a checkerboard across the United States, but this isn't just about gender. Schools are deeming themselves, as we saw from that opening clip, the sexual educators of our children. And it feels like it showed up in our schools out of nowhere. Where did it come from and who's doing it? Well, it doesn't take that far to go back to the WHO on this conversation. And under their watch, how have they proposed to educate our kids? Remember, the WHO is planning their International Pandemic Treaty, International Health Regulations, and this is under the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, under Agenda 2030. So everyone will be taught the same throughout the world. So let's look at some of their international sexual education guidance. So this is their kind of their book, their pamphlet, International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. It's by UNESCO and the WHO, hundreds of pages long. And you go in there and you look under, just for example, 5 to 8-year-olds. This is what they're proposing. For as young as 5, you're going to state that people show love and care for other people in different ways, including kissing, hugging, touching, and sometimes through sexual behaviors. So you'll say to a 5-year-old that if you like somebody, you can show them, love through sexual behaviors. Okay. Well, we go into Europe, and this is directly published out of WHO's regional office in Europe. And the title of this new document here is Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe. And this goes even further. So now we have that same breakdown of age groups, but a little younger, a lot younger, 0 to 4, 0. Enjoyment, this is what we're going to be teaching. Enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's own body, early childhood masturbation, 0 to 4. Then you go into 9 to 12 ages, acquire modern media competence, mobile phone, internet, dealing with pornography. So you can look at that and say, well, they're going to teach them maybe how to stay away from that's bad. But, at age 9, do we really want a classroom of teachers breaching the conversation about online pornography with
how
kids?
about the child whose family's doing a really good job of just keeping pornography off the internet, out of their phones, and suddenly you introduce, don't go look at this. If that's even what's being done, the power of suggestion is we're seeing this increase in gender affirming care as soon as you introduce transgender discussions in school. So these things really do seem to, set a precedent.
Yeah, this is coming from the World Health Organization, the same organization that pushed vaccines, disregarding the fact that they weren't really vaccines. They're to alter our own mRNA. And this was completely untested. And again, when Trump promoted the vaccines, no one wanted to take it. As soon as Biden became president, everyone was forced to take it. This is the same World Health Organization. They've lost a lot of credibility, in my opinion, especially when they want to now start teaching us. This is the World Health Organization. This is not going to fly in some countries. That's why they take a look at Africa and they're trying to push all this LGBTQ legislation down their throats, and they're resisting it. And then World Health Organization says, oh, it's just because Africa's just not a very intellectual continent, not made up of a lot of very smart people. So just they're literally an insulting group of people. And so now they're going to tell us how to approach sexuality. All of this is frightening because, first of all, sexuality was used for just about everything. To sell products, to shame people, and also for good and noble purposes. But have we forgot that sexuality is actually supposed to help you to become a saint? Well, that's why I'm going to jump into my commentary exclusively for our Patreon members. So if you are not yet a Patreon member, please go to patreon.com/The Father Leo Show. You can join at any level, and it also supports us knowing that you truly are connected and are benefiting from our content. And also we can benefit from your support as well as your ongoing kind of partnership. So I certainly hope that this was helpful to you, gets you thinking. In the meantime, I look forward to chatting more with you on our next episode, but stay hungry for God.